This is a story about love, loss, and the long road back to light. My son Ryder was born still after what seemed to be a healthy, full-term, uneventful pregnancy. Nothing prepared us for that day or for everything that followed. In this podcast, I'll take you through the moments leading up to his passing, the immediate aftermath, and the reality of learning how to survive something that feels impossible to survive. I'll show you how I slowly found my footing again, how joy eventually made its way back into my life, and where I am today. This is not medical advice, and I'm not a therapist or healthcare professional. These are my experiences, my perspectives, and my truth. If you are walking a similar path, I encourage you to seek guidance from your care providers and find what works best for you. But this is my story, and if you're here, I hope that somewhere within it, you find a little bit of hope. Last episode, we talked about Ryder's birthday. What that day felt like, what it stirred up, and how it was impacting me in real time. And today, we go back to our regular timeline, back to where we were just a few weeks after Ryder passed. We're home, the memorial services are over, and everyone's gone back to their lives. But we were still there, trying to figure out how to live in ours. Ann and I are in therapy, both individually and in group, and that's become part of our routine. One of the only things that feels structured in a time when everything else is going crazy. Somewhere in the middle of all this, my 40th birthday came and went. And there wasn't much acknowledgement of it at all. Not because people didn't care, but because I didn't want it. We were only days removed from our son's funeral, and there was literally nothing to celebrate. No part of me wanted attention. No part of me wanted a reminder that time was moving forward, so the day just passed. And that brings us to where we are now. A few weeks removed, still in the thick of it, and Mother's Day is quickly approaching. There's a version of grief that people don't really talk about enough. It's not the immediate shock. It's not the services. It's not the meals or the flowers or the people showing up. It's what comes after. The days and the weeks after everyone goes home. And this is where the spirit of this episode lives. After Ryder's services, Ann and I were just going through the motions. Most of our time was spent at home, just the two of us. There wasn't much movement. A lot of time on the couch, a lot of time in bed, and the days just blurred together. Depression was real. The sadness was constant. And joy, if I'm being honest, joy was not there. And then something else crept in. Silence. Our house was never silent before. Music was always playing. Our smart speaker was constantly on, and there was always something in the background. Music has always been a huge part of my life. It was a huge part of Ann and my relationship, even before we were together. It's part of how our friendship grew and part of what brought us together years later. Music was just always there. And now it wasn't. The house was quiet in a way that didn't feel normal. It wasn't peaceful. It just felt empty. We didn't turn anything on because we didn't want to. Because music meant feeling something. And at that point, feeling anything more than what we were already carrying just felt like too much. We hadn't gone back to work yet, and even thinking about work felt impossible. But I did take one step. So several weeks before this, the day after we lost Ryder, I did reach out to my employer's third-party leave administrator, and that conversation did not go the way anyone would hope for in something like this. There was no empathy, no acknowledgement of what had just happened. Just a very clinical response that my parental leave would be removed and I would be expected to return back to work. Obviously, that didn't happen. But what happened next is something I'll never forget. When my leadership team and other leaders in the building heard not just about Ryder, but about how the interaction with the third-party administrator was handled, they were furious. And I had multiple high-level leaders reach out personally, checking in, offering support, telling me I had all the time I needed. And I've said this before, not everyone showed up from work, and that's true. But the ones that did, they really were incredible. I was also in leadership at this time, and I can honestly say that I don't know how Ann and I would have made it through without the support of my team. But even with that support, we are just still surviving. And there's something that's starting to hit us in a different way. As I said, Mother's Day was coming. In our group sessions, we were preparing for something called a different kind of Mother's Day. A room full of parents, all carrying the same kind of loss, all holding space for their babies. We were healing, but it was so incredibly heavy. And that conversation didn't stay in that room. It came home with us. And Ann said something that I think a lot of people who haven't lived this might not fully understand. She did not want to be home or celebrate Mother's Day. She didn't want the reminders. She didn't want the texts. And she didn't want to see the posts. So we made a decision. And if I remember right, this conversation really started after our Tuesday group session. I believe those were on Tuesdays. And by Wednesday, we were booking a trip. That Thursday, the very next day, we were on a flight to Jamaica. Why Jamaica? Honestly, no real reason. I couldn't tell you one if I tried, other than it wasn't a bucket list trip. It wasn't something that we dreamed about. We couldn't do a dream trip. That wasn't the kind of trip that we were going to be going on. This was we're grieving and we need to get away trip. A runaway from life for a minute kind of trip. This wasn't a fun vacation. This was, we need to turn off what is about to happen vacation. We really needed to be isolated from the world. But if we were going to do that, we needed to do it somewhere that at least felt nice. This wasn't a celebration trip. It wasn't a party trip. This trip was a trip of escape. This was about survival. Nothing about this trip felt fun or good or exciting. It just felt necessary. And for the most part, it was good. We swam. We ate great food. We met amazing people. We fell in love with the culture and with the people of Jamaica. We already knew before we went that we loved the music, but we did find things that we enjoyed. And somehow, by complete accident, we ended up at one of the nicest resorts on the island. We have been back to Jamaica since this trip, and nothing is quite compared to that first vacation, or at least that first resort. But even in all of that, we cried. We cried in the room. We cried on the beach. We cried in the ocean. We cried at the restaurants. Because the truth is, grief doesn't stay home with you when you leave. It all came with us. Ryder came with us in every thought, in every moment, in every conversation. We told his story to people we'd never met. He was never not there with us on that trip. And something I want to share, especially if you've seen the post leading up to this episode, I did share some photos from that trip on TikTok, on Instagram, and LinkedIn. And I paired them with messages about grief and how joy can exist alongside it. But I want to be really clear about something. Those photos, they were chosen. They were the moments where we looked our happiest. And that was intentional for that post. But those moments, they were so few and far between because most of that trip wasn't that. Most of that time, we were just there. The same way we were at home, just existing. Only now we were doing it in Jamaica. And there were long stretches of just being neutral. Not okay, not falling apart, not having fun, just somewhere in between. But in those moments where we did connect again, where we sat in the ocean, where we floated, where we listened to the steel drums, where we ate great food, something small was happening. We were starting very, very slowly to learn how to live again. And in this new version of life that was starting in Jamaica, we smiled. We laughed. We made a few new memories. But in those moments, the guilt showed up every time. We'd laugh, and then we'd feel it. We'd smile, and then we'd feel it. This overwhelming sense of how can we feel this when Ryder isn't there? How is this even real? And even now, looking back at those photos, there's grief still there. And that guilt is still there. Guilt in seeing ourselves smile. Guilt in remembering those moments of laughter, and guilt in knowing that for a second, we felt okay in those weeks after losing Ryder. For the first time, we were starting to feel like there was life again, and that felt wrong. This trip wasn't healing in some big, obvious way, but it was something important. It was a step. It was the beginning of learning how to grieve, or how to have grief and joy in the same space. And that's something that does not happen overnight. And it's still not something we've mastered. Not even close. Just last night, Ann and I were talking about these posts and the podcast and this episode. And even now, there is still grief and guilt in looking at those photos of us being happy. Because now we know what's really underneath them. This journey is not a straight line. It is very much cyclical. You are good one moment and falling apart the next. And as much as we've grown, as much as we talk about Ryder, as much as we share our story, even through this podcast, we are still learning how to live with this every day. It has been 7 years, and we are still trying to figure out something new every single day. And I think this is where that feeling we were struggling to describe earlier really comes into focus. People around us at this time kept telling us that you're still parents, and we understood what they meant, but it didn't fully feel like that title belonged to us. Not in the way that people would celebrate it on Mother's Day or Father's Day. And that feeling, it extends beyond just holidays. Even in spaces that are meant to build community and support, we felt out of place. At this point in the timeline, I'm not back at work yet, but when I do go back, I find that we have all types of groups at work. Groups for veterans, for people of color, for LGBTQ plus community. And we have a parent group. And so when I come back to work eventually in this story, in this timeline, I start to question, where my group is. Because where do you put a parent whose child has died? There's no clean box to check for that. And that's something society doesn't always make space for. And I want to be clear about something. This doesn't mean that we don't believe parents who have lost a child are not still parents. If you've walked this path, you probably understand exactly what I'm trying to say here, that this just isn't a clean category. And it's not just the loss community. There are so many kinds of loss that don't fit neatly into the way the world celebrates these days. There are families carrying trauma. There are broken relationships. I have friends in the LGBTQ plus community that have been pushed out of their families and struggle through Mother's Day and Father's Day in a completely different way than we have. or them Ann and I have. And so for us, this was our first time navigating life in this new reality. We didn't feel like we fit cleanly into a mother or father box. And so we're in Jamaica trying to outrun our sadness. And then Sunday comes, Mother's Day. The whole reason we took the trip was to avoid it. And still there it was. A big buffet at the resort, Happy Mother's Day written in seashells, flowers being handed out. You couldn't escape it. We sat there at breakfast and we cried, but we stayed. And I think that's something that Ann and I are still learning and always will be. You don't escape grief, not on holidays, not on milestones, not on the days you wish you could just skip. Grief and life, they exist together side by side. And there's always going to be something missing. But at the same time, there's still going to be moments where you laugh, moments where you connect, moments where you feel something other than the weight of it all. But the absence never leaves. Ryder is always there, but he's also always missing. Just last night, our daughter came out of her bedroom with a picture that she had drawn. She was supposed to be asleep, but that's another discussion. But the picture was for Ryder because she misses her brother that she never got to know. And she came out and she handed us this picture and she asked how we could send it to him in heaven because she didn't know how. And the tears came even harder than normal. And so maybe that's a future episode because our children, they do know Ryder and they do celebrate him. And so maybe there's something that we should discuss there or something that we should navigate there. I don't know. We'll think about it. But the truth of it is we weren't trying to forget. We were just trying to breathe on this trip. That was the whole reason to go to Jamaica. We were just trying to breathe in the storm. And in that time, for us, that was enough. And even now, when I look back at those days and weeks, months after losing Ryder, what is so deafening about that time was how loud the silence was. And so if you've ever looked at someone's life and thought they looked okay, here's what I want you to take away from today's episode. Just know that you might only be seeing the moments that they chose to share. There's always something underneath. And sometimes underneath those moments, even in those moments that seem like they're the happiest they can be, there's grief and there's guilt. And all of it is living side by side. So if you're walking through grief right now and you're just surviving, that's enough. You don't have to figure it all out. You don't have to move forward in some perfect linear way. Just keep breathing. Just keep moving. We'll be back next week, and maybe we'll talk more about how our kids are learning to know and love Ryder in their own way. I'm not sure what next episode will bring, but until then, take care of yourself and have a great week.